two quotations, Tom. An editorial in the New York Times, quote, "Racial stereotypes still wreak havoc with the job possibilities of young black men," close quote. Quotation number 2, Thomas Sowell in Intellectuals and Society, quote, "Black unemployment rates were lower than those of whites as long ago as 1890, close quote.
And in 1930 as well.
And in 1930. First of all, black unemployment was lower decades ago, before the civil rights movement, before the New York Times began editorializing on on black poverty. How can that have been?
It shows, among other, well, the minimum wage law is one huge factor. 1930 was also the last year when there was no federal minimum wage law. If you look at the unemployment rate of black teenagers in 1948, 1949, it is a fraction of what it has been at any recent decade. And 1949 was a recession year, so the black teenage unemployment rate in 1949 was a fraction of what it was in even the most prosperous years of the 1990s.
And this is because the federal minimum wage said you must pay every worker at least this much.
Yes.
And when there was no minimum wage, kids, everybody, but particularly you're talking now about black teens, could get paid
whatever.
$1.50 an hour.
See, but the other thing,
but they could get employment. They could start learning skills. They could reach the first rung on the ladder, so to speak.
Yes.
That's what's,
and people move up very quickly. I mean, McDonald's has over 100% turnover a year. People say he's out flipping hamburgers. Yes, he's flipping hamburgers in January. Does not mean he's going to be flipping hamburgers in December.
Somewhere, he's learning how to get to work on time, how to get a
That's right, and he's not going to be. He's going to start up the ladder.
Right.
But what was different about the late 1940s was the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 specified what the minimum wage would be. The runaway inflation of the 1940s made that number meaningless. So for all practical purposes, inflation had repealed the minimum wage law.
I see.
Thank God I was a teenager in those years. And you know, when I started out my first full-time job as a Western Union messenger, my starting pay was 50% above the federal minimum wage because inflation had made the federal minimum wage meaningless. And so under those conditions, in 1948, black 16 and 17-year-olds had an unemployment rate under 10% and slightly less than that of white teenagers the same age. Now, as you come in, the liberals say, no, we've got to catch up with inflation. Starting in 1950, they escalated the minimum wage regularly, and then you began to see these horrendous rates of unemployment among black teenagers.
Diversity. Again, I'm quoting from Intellectuals and Society, quote, "Sweeping claims for the benefits of diversity in innumerable institutions have prevailed without a speck of evidence being asked for or given," close quote.
Yes.
Again, how come? Intellectuals ought to be asking. So we have diversity, we have affirmative action, diversity, and of course diversity is one of the sacred words of the academy these days. And nobody's tested to see whether diversity enriches the educate. No.
It's just definitional. Intellectuals have many skills which will enable them to evade the testing of what they believe. And that negates the fact that they are capable of testing it doesn't mean that they're going to test it.
Thomas Sowell, once again, quote, "At the same time you're getting all this mouthing of diversity," this is not from Intellectuals in Society, but it's from an interview you gave elsewhere. "At the same time you're getting all this mouthing of diversity, there's an extremely narrow ideological conformity that's being enforced." So we have diversity in the way people look, the ethnic groups or from which they come, the parts of the country from which they come, but once you arrive, you'd better start thinking the way we do.
Yes. I still get emails from students, who say that, when they raise any issues that go against the professor's ideology, they just get ridiculed.
Segment 4, Thomas Sowell, intellectual. We just learned that you started out as delivering telegrams. This was in New York. This was when you were living in Harlem. So you started out delivering. Now let's take you to age 24. When you're at Howard University. You write another book, well worth reading. They're all worth reading, but I love A Personal Odyssey, but I'm quoting from A Personal Odyssey in this case. quote, I was a 24-year-old high school dropout with mediocre grades in a mediocre institution, close quote. When did that change? When did your own intellect become engaged? When did the light bulb go on?
Oh, before then, but of course I was working during the day and going to school at night, which is not the ideal conditions for intellectual results. So I really didn't have the results.
So how did, but young Tom Sowell, what I can recall you were telling me that you would wait up at night, as I believe it, this was when you were a teen, you'd wait up at night for the early morning edition newspapers to come out. You'd walk up the block at a little after midnight and buy the first edition newspapers at the newsstand, take them back to your bedroom and read them.
Yes.
So you were an intellectual when you were a boy.
I'm not sure that reading the Yankee scores made you an intellectual.
Oh, it was the Yankee scores. I feel so much better now. I thought you were engaged in world. I've always thought, oh, Tom.
Can you imagine anybody in Harlem doing that today?
Walking around at midnight freely and without a kid,
as a small old white man had a little newsstand in Harlem, and he obviously had enough people doing this to make it worth his while to be open at midnight. And I would walk. It was a long block. I'd walk down this long block, get my newspapers, and come on back home and read them. A different world.